Yum, yum!
Okay, so that first video went a little long, and I've cut it into two parts. I told you this is going to take a while. I know William Vaughn. This is no 60-second video. So if you didn't watch the first video, it's essentially about setting up V-Ray and Octane, specifically Octane, to get a consistent render across all three renderers, MODO, V-Ray, and Octane. And this second video is going to be specifically about using V-Ray and Octane materials, V-Ray and Octane specific materials, the node editor for Octane, and the V-Ray materials in the shader tree to recreate that plastic material and see if there's any additional features within those two programs that could maybe create a better material or at least an equal one using the specific channels provided by those two programs. All right, let's get on with it. So let's stay here with Octane for a moment and recreate this white plastic material in Octane. And it's actually really easy in Octane because Octane will do it for you when you add an Octane override. So I go up here again to custom materials, add an Octane override. You see it right there. All I have to do is edit that in the schematic. I bring my schematic up. And here Octane has done its behind the scenes on the fly translation of that MODO material and turned it into an editable Octane material in the schematic for me. So here's my glossy material. Now Octane has three materials, like I mentioned: specular, glossy, and diffuse. Glossy is going to be used for most materials, both metals and plastics and things like that are going to be done with a glossy material. Very different settings within the glossy material, but you can achieve metals and dielectrics like plastic in the glossy material. The specular material is going to be for things like glass, and which we'll get to later, and the diffuse material is going to be for things like really rough surfaces or subsurface scattering surfaces. We'll get to that later as well. But you'll notice right off the bat, there's just not a ton of settings here. We've got some Octane specific nodes here on the left hand side, and you have to do Octane editing in the schematic. They don't have shader tree equivalents of all these nodes like they do the V-Ray materials. So getting down to it, we have a very important channel here called Index. That's Index of Refraction. Another important channel called Roughness, and another important channel called Specular. So they map pretty closely to what MODO is. Specular, we can use a value like 0 to 1 that's going to give varying intensities of the specular reflection with a white reflection, or I could plug a color into this channel here, the specular channel, if I want a colored reflection. So let's take a look at that actually, how that works. I can add a new texture here. I can add an RGB color, and I can make that color, let's say red. And then when I plug that into the specular channel there and start up Octane again, you'll notice I have red reflections, okay? Now if I want to adjust those reflections, I can adjust the index of refraction here, and I can give it a higher IOR, like 4, and have more intense reflectivity on that material. I can also adjust the roughness. Right now it's very low, 0.045. 0.045 is Octane's translation of that 15% roughness in the plastic material. So I can change this to 1, super rough, and you see it's just this super diffuse material. It still picks up that color from the reflections, but they're just so spread out, it looks really diffuse. If I change this to 0, they're going to be super sharp, just like that. So that's how those three channels there, roughness, index, and both specular, I guess 4 channels, and diffuse. Here my diffuse color is 0.8, just like it was in MODO. Those 4 channels are going to be used in conjunction with each other to give us a huge variety of materials in Octane. Let's change this back to white, boom, and boom. Now we've got white, so we're back to the plastic material minus the roughness, so let's change that back. I think it was 0.045, 0.045. And yeah, specular, we can unhook that and just keep it as 1. That's the equivalent to white, and delete that node. Maybe that's a little easier. And put our index of refraction back down to 1.5, which is a nice index of refraction for a plasticky material, 1.5, 1.6. And you can actually do that in MODO. So let me maybe show that really quick. These other channels, bump, normal, and displacement, are very self-explanatory. Film width and film index actually give a sort of iridescent look to things. If I bump this up here and, you know, make this point whatever, you can adjust these to get a sort of an iridescent effect on top of your material. We're not looking to do that, so I'm just going to turn that off. And whoops, not roughness. Film width, let's go back to 0. Turn that back to that. We're fine. It's ineffectual. I'm going to pause here and bring up my MODO material again. So I look at this. Let me delete the shader ball plastic here and take a look at my white plastic MODO material again. In fact, let me just move this out of the way. I'm going to use a different properties palette and a shader tree palette so we can look over here at MODO. There's another way to adjust reflections in MODO's physically based material, and that's using the refractive index. And that's essentially what we just did in Octane, right? We had it at 1.5, which is a nice plasticky refractive index. So I can do that in MODO as well. If I click that, you'll notice that that goes gray. So I can't adjust the specular amount anymore, but I can turn this to 1.5, I think it was in Octane. In fact, let's turn it to 1.6, why not? And then if I hit go over here in MODO, I'm just going to sort of hover and paint. You'll see that that 1.6 reflectivity is pretty similar to the 4% I had in the specular, or I'm sorry, 1.6 refractive index. It's a pretty similar reflectivity that I had as earlier with a 4% specular amount. But I can bump this up. Let me just, for fun, say knock it up to 20. Super reflective, right? So, but 1.6 is a nice plasticky refractive index amount. And it gives a similar look to what I had earlier. And some people may like to set their materials up like that. I tend to like to use the specular amount. But if you're translating this to Octane, let me go ahead and pause that guy again and add the Octane override here. Goes on there. There's my Octane override. And let me move these out of the way. Look at Octane now. It does carry over that index of refraction from the MODO material. The conversion process carries that over to the Octane material. Also carries over the diffuse color. This does a very good job of translating those material channels similar to V-Ray. So again, most of the setup in Octane to get a similar look at the MODO renderer is to convert your area lights and make imager adjustments back to a neutral imager. And you might have to go in and do gamma adjustments to your texture maps. But that's it. It does a very good job converting materials. So I'm going to stick with that now. Let's just keep that paused. Or I mean, turn that back on and get the new material in there. Let that takes 5 seconds for Octane to do anything. So looks good. Let's pause it, close that, and let's go back to V-Ray now, because V-Ray offers all kinds of options. V-Ray is very robust. It's been around for a long time, and it's got a lot of stuff in there. So I'm going to delete this. We'll just turn that off. And I'm going to add a V-Ray material. So you'll notice that there's a ton of V-Ray categories. We've got a lot of V-Ray materials. Here's the standard V-Ray material, which I'll show in a sec. But there's also this V-Ray AL surface, which is a great subsurface scattering material. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear to work with the GPU renderer yet, just the CPU renderer. Got a Carpe material and a hair material and a skin material and all kinds of stuff, right? A fast SSS material. We're just going to do the V-Ray, standard V-Ray material right now. So there's the standard V-Ray material. If I kick V-Ray into high gear here, just do the GPU renderer, that's fine. You'll notice that I don't have any way of getting a converted V-Ray material. I can't convert my white plastic MODO material into a white plastic V-Ray material. It'll do it for me on the fly if I don't have a V-Ray material in there and I have a white, it'll just do it for me on the fly. What I really like is for Chaos Group to let me convert this MODO material into the equivalent V-Ray material and let me adjust from there with some of these additional V-Ray properties. Unfortunately, I can't do that. When I add a V-Ray material, it's a standard gray diffuse material, and I have to go back and try to recreate my MODO material. So again, a couple ways to do this. Let's look at the diffuse color. We had 0.8 in MODO, so we'll turn that to 0.8. We didn't have a diffuse roughness in the MODO physical material, so I'm just going to keep that. And a self-illumination color we're not going to deal with. That's obvious what that is. We do have some different Brdf types in V-Ray, and this one in particular, GGX, is going to come into play in the next episode when we look at metals. But right now, I'm just going to keep it to blend. Reflection color is going to be white, just like it was with the specular color in MODO. Reflection glossiness. Okay, so MODO, remember, reflection roughness was 15%. Glossiness is sort of the inverse of roughness. Think of it that way. Full-on 1.0 reflection glossiness is a super sharp reflection, whereas 0 glossiness is going to be a super diffuse, sort of like a 1.0 roughness in MODO or Octane, right? Super rough. So, you may think, okay, a 15% roughness in MODO must equal a 85% or 0.85 glossiness in V-Ray. And it sort of does. Again, keep in mind, the roughness algorithms between these three renderers are different. A 15% roughness in MODO gave me like a 0.045 or something roughness in Octane on the conversion. I can't convert a MODO material into a V-Ray material, but when I just do this sort of logical conversion of 15% roughness to 8.85 glossiness, it's not giving me the exact look. It's looking a little bit softer. So, you're back to dealing with your artistic talents now. Do you want that a little tighter? Then we just bump up this to maybe 0.88 or something like that. I am using Fresnel reflections, and I'm locking that Fresnel index of refraction to the index of refraction of this material, which is 1.6. So what V-Ray's material does is it strikes a balance similar to MODO's between physically accurate and artist-friendly. So I can say, you know what, I want to keep that 1.6 refraction index of refraction because I'm going to have a glass material, let's say, maybe I change that to 1.3, but I want more intense reflections for an artistic purpose. So I can unlock that IOR, the Fresnel IOR, and adjust it independently. Right now it's 1.6, which is similar to what we had here with MODO, right? And it looks pretty similar, like the intensity of those reflections looks about right. Maybe a little more in V-Ray, that was a little darker to me. Maybe it's a little more reflective, but it's pretty close. And you can, of course, adjust this to unrealistic values. I could bump this up to like, let's grab the V-Ray material, and I could bump this Fresnel IOR up to something like 6 to get more intense reflections. So you'll see that pop in 1 second here. There it is. So that's sort of in a nutshell how V-Ray's materials work, and in conjunction with MODO. I'm going to put this back to 1.6. I'm not going to go through all the channels here, but it's got a lot of channels. You can go in and adjust a fog absorption per material. You have a translucency, a subsurface scattering options here. Although I think the fast SSS and AL shader are better for SS, subsurface scattering effects, and V-Ray. You can do it in the V-Ray standard material as well. You can do double-sided. You can override all kinds of things in the environment. You can add edge width rounding similar to MODO. You can do displacement distance and bump distance. All this stuff similar to MODO, except even more so. You have some more options. So V-Ray, very robust. But we can't convert MODO materials to V-Ray materials. We have to kind of do it intuitively. So I'd love that option like we have in Octane. I think that's it on these. So let's move on to metals next, because this took 17 hours to get through white plastic. And I told you that this is going to take a while.
Yum, yum!